Thank you very much, Absalom, for leading us in an opening prayer. And thank you, each and every person that has made it to today's call. We are honored to have you for having spared some of your time. And once again, my name is Gloria Nyiramjisha. Some of you that know me call me Gloria Gisha or Gigi. And I'm honored to be your moderator for the evening. And once again, this is the Polarize Mentorship Series. It happens after 2 weeks. It happens bi-weekly, and it's organized by the Deliverance Church Makere Hill Polarize Group under the leadership, of course, of the church. And we host different speakers time after time who discuss topics to do with financial growth, personal branding, like we did the last 2 weeks, and all the other topics that you're going to see with time. And if this is your very first time, we are honored to have you. If you've forgotten to invite someone out there, this is the time. Send that message, forward the message, post on your status and your stories. We'd love to share this knowledge with each and every person. We don't want to leave anyone behind. Without wasting much of your time, today we are having again Mr. Elijah Omagor. Elijah is an advocate of the High Court of Uganda and has been practicing commercial law since 2006. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from Makere University and a Master's of Business Administration from ISAMI. He is very passionate about business law, finance, and African development. Thank you. Elijah is currently the Managing Director of Connect Initiatives, a premium Pan-African enterprise development and investment fund based in Kampala. Uganda. He has previously worked as a head legal and company secretary of Nile Breweries Limited, a subsidiary of AB InBev from 2011 to 2017. Prior to that, he was legal manager at Stanbic Bank Uganda Limited from 2006 to 2011. Elijah also served as an executive of PSF Savings and Credit Cooperative Society from 2013 to 2022, where he was very instrumental in the growth of the circle's membership and assets. His hobbies include reading, writing, and traveling. And for those that joined in the call, I thought I would actually do this before we started the meeting. I don't know if I should pick on anyone. I remember one of the most active people was Elijah Kaiganya. If you could share what was some of your highlights or some of your take-homes. Elijah Kaiganya, are you able to unmute and maybe share some of your highlights or something you can recap from the previous session? In case you are not able to speak wherever you are, anyone who would like to share some of their take-homes, you can raise your hand and unmute, and just in 1 minute, you share some of your take-homes. Okay. Okay. Okay, well, personally, one of my take-homes was because we're looking at personal branding, and Elijah started with an interesting exercise where he projected different countries, and he told us to say what was that one outstanding thing that we would think of the very minute that we looked at, let's say, like a country like Nigeria, like Uganda, Kenya, and people had their different views. And we went on and on, and one of the things that stood out for me was how to create an authentic brand. And with branding, as a person, you play a certain part, but also the people that are surrounding you, the environment that is surrounding you, it also highly impacts on your brand. So the things that I recall what he said was we have to surround ourselves with a network, have relevant mentors, a coach, be disciplined in whatever we do, and then identify our values, because these say quite a lot about us. Okay, I'm seeing a hand. Natasha, please, can you unmute and share your take home?
My take home was that you have to be deliberate about the brand that you want to create for yourself. And from like the example he gave of judges and how they cannot be attending all events or participating in all activities that are maybe permissible to them, but because of who they are and what they choose to be branded as, or the brand that they choose to associate with, it dictates even their social activity. And so my take home was you can choose the brand you want to be and work actively towards that, even though it comes with a cost.
Thank you, Natasha. If only I could afford to give you a star, I would give you one right now. You were very attentive in our previous session, and I'm seeing other comments in the chat room. Kaiginia says authentically is vital in brand development, and Paul, one of our deacons, says you must choose the narrow path in building a brand. Yes, and again, Elijah Kaiginya says I have more than one story about me, but I must make sure that whatever story that will ever be randomly chosen about me, it will best represent him. Yes, so I'm happy to see that some people are quite attentive. And so without much let me take us away. We are honored to have you.
Thank you, Gloria, Red's leadership. Can you hear me?
Yes, Elijah.
Am I loud and clear?
Very loud and clear.
Okay. Gloria, kindly warn me when I am left with 10 minutes, so that if I am going on and on, I can wind up my presentation. So feel free to interrupt me and warn me. Is my presentation on?
Yes, it's on.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be back. We live in a place which used to be a village. I don't know that it's still a village. It has been urbanized, but when we had just moved to this place called Kungu, we used to say that we only know our true friends when they come back and visit, because our place was very far on a dusty road. Most people would come for the first time without knowing what they were getting into. So the only visitors we truly knew loved us are those who came back the second and the third time. So I want to thank the Primaries leadership for inviting me the second time. And this evening, we'll be talking about a resilient brand, which is really the second part of the topic we handled last time about building a personal brand. And thanks for those who have shared your highlights from last time. It's good to know that you people are not just star students in your former academic life, but you've continued to be star people. So yes, the main thing, I'll just recap that really the key highlight about personal branding is your authentic voice. Many times what kills our brand is when we are not authentic. This evening we had we had a debate at my workplace. I work for an organization called Connect Initiatives. And we had a debate because our person in charge of marketing had come up with a very nice Eid message. And then the question came up, but we're a Christian organization. Should we be celebrating and highlighting Eid? Of course, it generated a long debate. But in the end, the question we asked is, what is our authenticity as an organization? Someone said, but even Centenary Bank is a Catholic bank, but it wishes people a happy Eid. And I don't want to create that debate here, but really the point is that your personal brand stands on your authenticity. And of course, part of that authenticity is using, in the end, we have many stories, but using that main thing about you should be your main single story. And I think last time I also mentioned that one of the traps we fall into is confusing our education or profession with our personal brand. Recently, those who follow the news, you saw a very high figure, a very high official in one of the parastatals not wanting to retire. And it's also common in many offices in this country, which I don't want to name. But sometimes, actually, when people are fearing to retire, it's not that they don't have money. They probably have money to live with. It's just that they've tied up their identity with their job, that sometimes they don't see life without that job. And so even this evening, as we talk about a resilient brand, building a resilient brand, these are things that we should bear in mind. Our authenticity, not confusing our job, education, career with our personal brand, because our personal brand goes much more than just the job we do or the degree that we hold. And of course, I said we shouldn't confuse enjoyment with meaning or passion. Passion doesn't necessarily mean that you enjoy. It just means that you find fulfillment. And the example we gave is of parenting, which is one of the most difficult and stressful jobs you'll ever do. And yet it is one of the most meaningful. All right. So that was part of what we discussed last time. And so today, I have been, I said we would continue talking about resilience in building a resilient brand. And I just want to begin by saying that for all of us in life, however much you'll want to walk the straight and narrow road, every once in a while, your brand may get embroiled in either a scandal. It may be something that, it may be just something that brings out a part of you that you don't want to associate with your own brand. And this evening, as we talk about building resilience, it is just really those things. What do we do either when we find ourselves that there's been a failing in what actually represents us as an individual? It could also just be from the point of view that your personal brand has been caught up in things. Maybe it has been so lost in your job or your career, and you want to introduce some resilience. So I'll just begin by mentioning there's something that keeps coming up, character versus reputation, personal branding versus character. Now, ideally, these should be the same thing, that your personal brand should be something that you're known for. And what you're known for is your reputation. And it is good that your reputation actually represents your character. Otherwise, when we find ourselves that our reputation and our character are different, then you're most likely in the realm of hypocrisy. Because a hypocrite is someone who presents something that they are not. So just to clear that in the context of our discussion is that the reputation that you carry, what you're known for, we are assuming that that is actually your real character. If your true character and your reputation are different, then that is a different discussion or conversation we need to have about your authenticity. So the question would be, how do I handle a crisis, a brand crisis? And most of us, it will come up. Sometimes it will be malicious. I know many people, I have some good friends. I know many people, either in the context of your work, some people may just decide to malign you, to spread wrong information about you, either for purposes of doing away with you. You know, if you are in a position where some people feel that they should have that position, people may actually generate malicious information or malicious stories about you. So the question would be, how do we handle such crises? And something comes to mind. A few years ago, I think that was around 2021, you remember there was that mouse or rat story, which Cafe Javas got embroiled in when a customer claimed that they had found a rat in their milkshake. Another example I have is of Pastor Robert Kayanja. A few years ago, there were some allegations made about him. Now, I use these as examples. I do not know the true facts, so I can't say that this was true or not, but what I want to use is really the example of how you handle a brand crisis, because like Pastor Robert Kanja, these allegations made about you, but you are a respected leader of a congregation. So whether the allegations are true or not, they will still touch on your brand. For CJs, it was not a personal brand, it was a real commercial brand, but you could see that whether it was true or not, it brought a crisis to their brand. But when we talk about authenticity, and you see that staying true to who you are is that even amidst those challenges, then your brand remains resilient. Because I remember I was so impressed. I have a bit of liking for marketing. It is something I fell in love with marketing when I worked for Nile Breweries. Yes, for those who do not know, I worked for Nile Breweries. I was still saved, but I loved the way they marketed, and I wanted to learn a bit of how they do it, but I was doing for them legal work. But I loved the way CJ's crisis unfolded, because the brand itself didn't say much, but all through that crisis, it was the customers who were actually defending CJs. And the same with Pastor Robert Kayanja. Again, regardless of what you think about him, I also loved the fact that many of his flock, many of the people he had brought up actually came up to defend him against these allegations. So how do you build a resilient brand? It is through your authenticity, through the people who can attest to your brand. Sometimes in those periods of crisis, when people are mudslinging you, it is those other people that you have touched, who have seen the authenticity of your brand. They will come to your aid because they believe in what they see in your life. And so it is, that's why I keep talking about authenticity, because really, in the end, what stands out about you is that authentic you that each one of us relates with. I know that Paul Uguza is a deacon for Primaries, and if you have interacted with Mr. Paul Uguza and largely with his wife, you know that their authentic self is really a lot about marriage relationships, and it is you just sitting with Paul for a few minutes, you'll actually know that his heartbeat is for stable marriage. No wonder he's right in the pre-marriage. I know he's also a deacon for the marriage, and it just flows out of him. Paul is the kind, if he dare gets to know that you have problems in your relationship, he may actually approach you even if he's uninvited. So using that example is that most of us, I'm sure most of you who are in pre-marriage, that is what you know about Paul. You have experienced it. You have seen that. You've seen the level of sacrifices he's able to take because of what he believes in. I think there is a year Paul was a best man. I don't know how many times. Now, this is a pre-marriage occasion. I've been a best man a few times. It is not something pleasant. Of course, on the wedding day, it is pleasant, but it takes a lot of sacrifice to walk with a bridegroom and his bride. These days, because you people hold very expensive weddings, it also takes a financial sacrifice. So when you see him taking all those sacrifices because of what he believes in, you're able to see the authenticity of his brand as a master of relationships, a master of marriage. And so there are things, even if there are allegations which could be made about Paul Uguza, many of us wouldn't believe them because of what we have tested from his brand. That is just as an example. And I remember when I just started my own business, this was a very difficult time around 2020. We're coming off the pandemic. That is, we're recovering from the first lockdown. And I remember that there were many clients who didn't understand what I was trying to do with the Connect initiatives, but many of them came because of what they had experienced in my previous work with them, either at PSEV or those that I had served in different fora. So that is the resilience that you need in your brand. And I have already talked about your character and reputation, that the two should always align, lest you'll find yourself in the realm of hypocrisy. So aside from crisis, resilience of your brand will always also come from your ability to adapt and grow. Because we live in a very, our world these days is very fast-paced, and I guess I don't need to say much to convince you, because most of you here are younger than me. So by necessary implication, you actually you're more in line with the modern ways of doing things and thinking. So for your brand to be resilient, I guess for you now, it is common knowledge that you need a very high level of flexibility, adaptability, and what I would call a growth mentality, because that is what gives you resilience. Now, in life, there are always two kinds of things. There are things that are core and unchanging, like your values. Usually it is your core values that give you authenticity, and those things should not change. Whether you find yourself working at libraries, World Bank, Red Cross, there are things about you which should not change. They remain the same, because it is those core things that don't change that give you the first level of resilience or the foundation. But then, because we live in a world that is fast changing, there are also things that need to change. And I believe the fact that we are having this meeting on Zoom is another example of things that need to change. I'm sure I remember that before COVID, most of our meetings were physical. But part of embracing change that has given us resilience as a ministry is the ability to adapt to new changes. Because after COVID, when COVID came, we embraced technology, which has actually helped us serve better. Because I guess maybe if we're having this meeting physically at church, maybe we'll be having less people than are actually able to join the call. But that is the same even for your resilience as a brand. That yes, while you project the core of who you are, you should also have the flexibility to adapt with the times. And what that flexibility and adaptation means for each one of us will differ. But the thing that moves your brand and makes it resilient with the changing times is that ability to grow with those times, to remain relevant in those times, even if the core of you remains the same. So we are online, we are still empowering, we are still sharpening each other, but the mode of the platform or the mode has changed, and that is the same. I'll give two examples. The first is the Apostle Paul. You know that the Apostle Paul is one of those people who underwent a radical transformation in life, because he first began by persecuting the church and then became a great apostle. But you actually realize that his core didn't change, because even in persecuting the church, it was his firm beliefs. It was his firm beliefs in Judaism that he thought that these Christians were a threat to Judaism. But when he received revelation, he still remained a very passionate guy about values, religious values, only that he was now doing it from a more enlightened point of view. So you could see that with new knowledge, he was able to grow and adapt. The other adaptation, we see that previously, where he was persecuting people, forcing them to agree with his beliefs, he was able to adapt and persuade. I think when you read Paul's letters, most of them are very persuasive. Again, the same passion, but more persuasive. So you could actually see that he adapted to the new times. The other example I would give is Roger Mugisha. These days, he's a bit quiet, but Roger Mugisha started as a DJ with Shadows, Angels, and then at some point, when he gave his life to Christ, we could see a transformation. At some point, even he started preaching and doing things. Somehow he faded, but a good example of adaptation to new times, because that ability to adapt is what gives your brand resilience. So I've used some examples in this presentation, and you realize that I was very particular about the people I have chosen, because sometimes one of the clear indications of the resilience of your brand is that it creates polarization. So usually a strong brand is sometimes very polarizing, that there are these firm believers who say this is Elijah is a good man, and then there are those who family believe Elijah is a bad man. So sometimes it may lead to discouragement, but just be assured that as you grow in resilience, and especially when it comes to a bit of crisis, don't be worried if your brand creates those polarities. Those who firmly believe that you're good, and there's those who strongly oppose. I know that going through it can be a challenge, but it's actually one of the best indicators of resilience, because when you see whether it was Jesus, whether it was the Apostle Paul, whether it was the prophet Elijah in the Bible, they always attracted that polarity, that those who followed them wholeheartedly, and then those who opposed them felt like it was their life calling to oppose. That is a good, it means that your brand is resilient, because what makes your brand resilient is the fact that there are people who vote for you. And the only way people vote for you is when you're authentic to yourself, that actually there are many people who have experienced who you truly are. So how do you create that resilience? Of course, you know that we need to have good lasting impressions and good lasting first impressions. And the best way to build resilience is to be introduced by others. I'm sure that you know that a lot of the opportunities you have in life, some of them you have attended interviews which you didn't actually attend. You know that sometimes you will be discussed in a boardroom where you are not. And so that resilience will come from the fact that there are people that you have touched in the course of your life who are happy to introduce you and speak for you even where you are not. And that will give you resilience, because it means that you no longer need your physical presence for your brand to stand out. But also, again, which is something that we need to be mindful of, I have grown up in a Christian background, and sometimes we have, I don't want to call it false humility, but even up to now, sometimes it is very uncomfortable speaking about myself. And yet I have worked with Americans. Americans sometimes even border on boastfulness and pride. They love talking about themselves and their achievements. But if you're going to build a resilient brand, then we have to get comfortable introducing ourselves, because it is how you introduce yourself that creates that story that you want to project. Otherwise, if you're not asserting that story, then we are likely to create other stories, some of which may be watering your brand. Again, from the Bible, you can see it from the letters of Paul. Paul wrote to churches. I believe those churches knew him. Okay, there may be some members, but some of those are churches he planted. But whether he was writing to Timothy or another person, he always introduced himself. And you can see that eventually his brand became resilient because he kept on emphasizing what he wanted us to know about him. Paul, an apostle of Christ, and all those things he used to say, he was able to wash his past history and reintroduce himself the way he wanted us to remember him. And today, most of us, we remember Apostle Paul the way he introduced himself, even his past, to just use it as an example of someone who had a fundamental change in his life. So, introduce yourself the way you want your brand to be known, and use every opportunity to introduce yourself. Don't just be happy to tell us your name. Get a way of telling us a bit about your personal brand, because that is what helps others introduce you. So when I know that Natasha is a good usher, or she's a person who is good at customer service, when I'm in a place where they are looking for someone who fits the description of what Natasha does, I become her ambassador. I just tell them that I know such a person. And that is what makes your brand resilient, that it opens for you doors even where you are not. Because once you reach that level, then we know that you've actually built a resilient brand. I think the last time we gave the example of Amos Wekesa. Amos Wekesa is one of those outstanding Ugandans that if you chanced to meet Bill Gates in a plane or on a lift and he asked you that I want you to invest in tourism in Uganda, you don't have to think twice. Probably one of the first names that will come to you will be Amos Wekesa because of that resilient brand that he has created. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I had to share. I would want at this point to take any questions or comments. Back to you, Gloria.
Wow, thank you very, very much, Elijah. Can we show Elijah some appreciation, guys? Some hand clap emojis. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much, Elijah, for such an insightful session. It was, I was hoping it would go on and on. Yeah, you are being appreciated in the chat room. I believe from here, as we get ready for the public holiday, we'll be focusing on how to build resilient brands. For those that might be having some questions, please feel free to share the questions in the chat room. Or if you have a personal question, you can raise your hand, or you can reach out to my personal inbox. But for now, before I take any other questions, Elijah, there were two questions from the previous session. One, you had highlighted that perhaps you are not quite well guided in your career path, and someone had a relevant question. Someone said, how do you deal with the realization that all the struggle was not really necessary? When you said, I think when you mentioned that at some point you thought you shouldn't have done law, but you should have done something else. So that was in relation to what you had shared. The person was asking, how do you deal with the realization that all the struggle was not really necessary? And how do you break the news about the changing brand to people that sacrificed for the previous one? I think this is one question. Yeah, this is one question. How do you break the news about the changing brand to people that sacrificed for the previous one? That is something to ponder on as we take some other questions. We have Liz Atim with her hand up. Please, you can unmute and ask a question, then we'll have Faith. Liz?
Yes. Elijah, thank you so much. That was very insightful. I think for me, what has stood out for me in the sharing was authenticity. Authenticity is very key in building your brand. My question is how one can deal with comparison, because I have noticed that while you are putting in a lot of effort to grow your brand, sometimes you find yourself struggling with comparing yourself to people probably doing the similar things that you're doing, but have been there before you and they are sowing. So how can one deal with that so that they can excel and stay in their lane by being their authentic selves? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That is a good question. I think most of us can relate to that. Faith Aida, she says it's not a question, but please, Faith, you can unmute and
Hi everybody. Oh gosh, it's been years. But thank you, my boss. Thank you, Elijah, for that. It was beautiful. Um, that you ended on the note of how Americans really assert themselves or puff themselves up so much, and that is so true. When I remember. Okay, very short story. When I was in the pandemic, when I'd lost my job, I have a number of former campus classmates that are studying and working abroad, and they would the way they would describe the things I am able to do because of what I was doing at that time or the experience I had, I would wonder in which world they are hoping to get a job. Anyway, what I wanted to comment was, or to add was, the other thing about branding or knowing who you are is accepting the compliments. You may not puff yourself up so much, but when somebody compliments you, it's good for you to accept the compliment. Or if they say you're really good at what you do, before brandishing it and saying, no, it's nothing basic, and and watering it down. Take it, accept it. Oh, thank you. If you feel so Christianese that you're going to take the glory of the Lord Most High, you can just accept it. Thank you. And yeah, that in the person will know that you are actually good at what you do, even if they knew. But when you water it down, you sow seeds of doubt in them. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Faith. I tend to always, if someone compliments me, I'm like, oh, are you sure? Or really, like that self-doubt. Thank you for highlighting that as well. It's something that we all need to check. And then Absalom is asking, how does one build comfort of introducing themselves and what they do? Wow. How does one build comfort of introducing themselves and what they do? I think, Elijah, you can respond to those questions in the meantime as we await any other questions.
Thanks, Gloria. Thanks, Faith, for that comment. For the record, I worked some years with Faith, and she has a great brand that has continued to open doors for her even after we finished working together. So the first question is, Gloria, what was that first question? I just got the bit about breaking the news of the change of the pivot, but what was the first part of the question?
So you remember you mentioned how you did law and then at some point you...
Oh, yes. Okay.
So this person
Thank you.
was saying, how do you deal with the realization that all the struggle was not really necessary? And how do you break the news about the changing brand to people that sacrificed for the previous one?
Okay. So being the typical Christian that I am, I take solace in the fact that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So I've also realized that there is, when your steps are ordered of God, there is no mistake. So yes, I might have changed, pivoted from practicing law as most people know it, but even in my current role, I still use a lot of my legal knowledge. And I can also assure you that there are many people who deal with me because of the prestige of being a lawyer. So it was not wasted. So even when you discover that you're not on the path that you want to be on, use it as a foundation, as a building block. I have another friend, he's an architect, ended up as an architect in strange circumstances. But he tells me that today he's also now into business, he's into real estate construction. And the first major break he got in life is a South African gave him goods worth 1 billion Uganda shillings just because he's an architect. He said, if you're an architect in Uganda, I can trust you. So yes, it may be that you're pivoting, but that foundation is not wasted. Just use it, whatever it is. And I'm sure all of us, when you look back to your life, even the things that you thought were mistakes, you can actually see that God has used them to continue promoting you. So don't despise them, because what you despise will not bless you. But give thanks and continue your journey the way you want it. And how do you break the news of change to those who sacrifice? The same thing is that there are many people who will not believe. I have been fortunate that most of the people who sacrificed for me, including my wife, my mom, my siblings, they understood the pivots I had to make. But there are times when people will not understand the sacrifices. Last week, I was talking to a doctor who, after the parents had paid for him to do medicine, decided to go and start an NGO. And he tells me his father keeps saying that, but what is wrong? What is the problem? And it is hard for him to explain that it is not just about making money, he's trying to live a purposeful life. So it's not always going to be easy to break the news. It's not always going to be easy to convince, but your authenticity demands that you're authentic and try to explain. Eventually people get to understand, because the nature of life is that most of us will understand our lives backwards. Even the Bible we read, it will look like Moses, Gideon, King David. It will look like they had figured out their lives. But it's just that we are reading the Bible backwards. We already see what happened. But I believe even them, they had the same struggles we had, convincing people. Elisha burning his oxen and following Elijah. I'm sure his family might have said, as our guy ran mad. Peter and those other apostles who, after getting a catch of fish, actually abandoned the boats and followed Jesus. It wasn't as easy as it looks, but eventually, I'm sure, even their relatives, when they look back, they realize that that was the right decision. So it's not always going to be understood, but if it is for the sake of your brand and your authentic self, sometimes give room for people to understand afterwards. For Liz's question dealing with comparison, it is a real battle. I remember one of the most depressing nights of my life was when I was in the same class at the university with my wife. And then we had friends who were also classmates. So the four of us were all classmates and later got married. Now we went to visit these people a few years back, and going to their home. These are people who had a 5-bedroom house, each bedroom self-contained. They had about 4 cars parked. I was driving a Premium at that time, and their house help was using a RAV4 to go shopping. Then they had the Benz and others. Anyway, to cut the long story short, I left that. They invited us for dinner. We enjoyed the dinner. It was actually sumptuous, but I left that place very depressed, because I kept on wondering, what course units did these guys do that for us we didn't do? But that was the day, that night, as I thought and reflected, it was the night that I got peace about what I wanted to do, because I realized that they are running a different race from mine, and we cannot use the same marking scheme. So that is one. So I celebrated them, and maybe God also comforted me, because a few years later they divorced, and for us, we are still married. So I realized that maybe sometimes the price of success is different. For them, maybe it was worth the divorce. Maybe for me, it would not have been worth the divorce. So that is the first point I want to make about comparison, that we never know what is going on in other people's lives, because our definitions of success may be different. But the other thing is, when you find people that you're forced to, it's a natural thing, and it is one of the ways. Some of us are competitive. Liz, you may be like me. I'm actually a very competitive person. But I have learned, there's a gentleman called Simon Sinek who has written a very nice book, Infinite Games. And one of the ways to turn it is that when you find someone whom you're being forced to compete with, make them your worthy rival. So don't approach them as a competitor, approach them as a worthy rival whom you want to learn from. Because really, in the end, what makes competition bad is the attitude with which we want to compete. So if you go and visit the Ruguzas and you find they have a very big house, they have a very nice house, those who have not been there, but don't be jealous about their house. Make them a worthy rival. If a house is a big thing to you, you learn from them. Find out how you can achieve the things they've achieved. And one thing I know about successful people is that most of them actually, those people who have succeeded the right way, love to talk about their success. They love to talk about their accomplishments. They will actually be very good mentors to you. Today I was visiting a client who has a farm, and his competitor is his biggest mentor. When he's stuck, he goes, and this guy is older, always guides him. So when you're forced to compare, when you're forced to deal with the competition, try and make people worthy rivals, people whom you want to emulate, whom you can learn from. And you'll find that you'll actually not be forced to have that negative thing which wants you to pull people down, that makes you treat others as enemies. Lastly, for Absalom, there are people who are comfortable talking about themselves. For example, the Americans, I think it's just natural. So you're either that or you're not. So for the rest of us, I doubt that it will ever be comfortable. It is just the discomfort that you have to learn to cultivate and live with. I am actually, up to today, I am not comfortable talking about my achievements, but I am forced to do that because that is the only way doors open for me. For many years, I've been in finance. I've been in finance for over 10 years. But it is because I used to run PSAVE, which was a church-based thing. Everyone knew about PSAVE. I didn't need to do a lot of marketing. But when I started Connect initiatives, I have had to keep drumming in what I do. And I have clients, especially my former classmates who knew me as a lawyer. So many of them have been able to invest money with us because of me being able to tell them what I do. Otherwise, most of them assumed that I was practicing law. So it is not comfortable. I have not yet found comfort in introducing myself and saying what I do. But every time I just have to remind myself that that is what I need to do uncomfortably. But that is also how God designed us. Those scriptures which we normally say, the body, I see Gloria has come on. It is, I think she's telling me that my time is up. Gloria noted, let me just finish this point. So we are members of one body. What that means is that we all do different things. But I will not know that Absalom is a gifted media person unless I am told. Actually, the Bible says, how will they know unless they are told? So unless you have a marketing department that markets for you, then you can keep quiet. But for as long as you're your own marketing department, you have to do even that which is uncomfortable. Back to you, Gloria.
Thank you, Elijah. I believe all these questions were answered to each and everyone's satisfactory. When you were responding to last week's question, I remembered one thing I always tell myself, personally, I'm practicing what I didn't study. And I always reflect on this scripture in Isaiah where he said, when the Lord asked that, who shall I send? And he said, send me, Lord. So I always tell myself, wherever the Lord has positioned me, that's why he has called me for such a time as this. That's why he has called me to serve him, to work, and for a different purpose. I don't want to sound so religious, but yeah, we are not ashamed of the gospel. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out. So wherever you find yourself, somewhere in your career path, you are you are changing to different career path, don't feel disgruntled. It's because maybe the Lord has called you for that very time. So I would like to appreciate each and every person that has made time to join in tonight's call. For those that have joined for the very first time, we are so delighted to have you. Please, if you're not in any of our WhatsApp groups, you can drop your contact so the leadership of the Primarids will capture your contact and add you to our WhatsApp group for updates every now and again. And once again, for those that joined in late, this is the Primarids Mentorship Series. It happens bi-weekly, and we host different speakers who share different topics. For now, I'm going to invite our deacon who is on the call, Mr. Paul Luguza, to appreciate our speaker and conclude us in a word of prayer.
Good evening to you all. Thank you, Gloria, for leading us so beautifully, moderating this session very well. Elijah, we appreciate the wisdom, the insights, and the very clear way you've relayed the message. You use very interesting examples. I had to keep reminding myself, focus on the message, but very resilient brands, they really brought the message across. Thank you so much, Elijah. We appreciate the time you put in, and more even from your own life and from what you've gone through and experienced and learned. And you can feel it when someone is speaking authentically, not from just book knowledge, but from a life they have lived, and it carries an anointing with it. So we appreciate you, Elijah. Thank you so much. I know we shall be having you again and again to drink from the streams of wisdom that you carry. Friends, I believe this is a great way to have spent a day going into a public holiday. Like Gloria earlier said, we have a lot to think about. You know, it's not enough to just hear. Get down on your notebook, and write down, what am I going to do? What do I want my brand to look like? What has God called me to be, to do, and get a bit of some time to reflect. How do I apply this in my life? Because it's not just us teaching you to understand, to learn, but you to obey and to do so that your life can be better. So get some time and work through, what are my action points from such a beautiful and resourceful meeting. Let's pray as we conclude. Lord, we want to say thank you for your grace. Thank you for your mercies. Thank you for the wisdom that you're giving our generation. Indeed, this house shall carry a greater glory than the former houses, because of the grace, because of the knowledge, because of the wisdom, because of what you are releasing in our lives. So I pray wherever we are, we will be able to build resilient brands, because your word says, let your light so shine among men so that they may give your Father in heaven glory. So Lord, we ask you that wherever we are, will boldly shine, will boldly work on this, so that your name, like so in Solomon's time when he was famous, but you were glorified. So we ask you that our lives will be all you want them to be, for the sake of your glory. We thank you, we bless Elijah, and thank you for his life and his work and his ministry and the blessing that he is to us. We thank you, Lord, for him. We bless each one of us on this call. In Jesus' name we pray. Good night, and have a happy Eid.
Good night, people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Elijah. Thank you, Uncle Paul.